Welcome to the Rebellion Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Barton. Today is a very special episode. We're doing a second episode this week due to some brand new big news. The government of Saskatchewan has declared the week of April 8th to 14th to be Craft Brewing Week in our province. We are also celebrating our Fourth Annual Cask Festival. It's happening Friday, April 13th at the Rebellion Taproom, and it's going to feature rare, unique beers you can't find anywhere else from 13 breweries across the prairies, including Manitoba, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. Today we're sitting down with Parker Willfong. He's an award-winning homebrewer and craft beer expert with in-depth knowledge and passion for all things craft beer. He's played a huge role at the Ales Club, as well as being a beer judge, and pulled in a few medals with some of his own killer beers. Parker, welcome.
Thank you, Matt.
How's it going?
Oh, it's going fantastic. I'm getting excited for the beer week here, Cask Festival on Friday. Ales Club competition is running through this whole week, so I'm sitting down judging every single night, and that should be fun and tiring.
Nice. You got to stay hydrated.
Very hydrated, yes.
I'm going to be seeing you on Saturday then. I'm stewarding.
Oh, excellent. I will look forward to seeing you. Drop off some beers in front of me.
Awesome. I hope I don't screw up and spill it on you or something.
Oh, well, that's okay. There's always more in the bottle. We'll live.
So today we're going to start off the podcast by drinking a beer called Death by Coconut. It's an Irish porter by Oscar Blues Brewery. They're a Colorado-based original craft brewery kind of thing. They're kind of known as the first craft brewery to put their beer in cans, and they are the inventors of the crowler system. So that's a little fun fact.
I did not know that they did that.
I just found out this morning.
That's interesting.
But you might have heard of their beers. They got
I've heard of Oscar Blues, and they've always had fantastic beer. Their Dale Pale Ale is one of the best.
I heard it was like one of their very first beers.
Yes, yep. It's been around forever. It's one of those white elephants or white whales that the craft brewers are always looking for. They want to try it. It's just got a allure about it.
The Dale's Pale Ale?
The Dale's Pale Ale.
Oscar's Blues?
Oscar Blues in general, but the Dale's Pale Ale in particular.
Let's get started with this Death by Coconut. I'm going to give it a sniff here. Their description says, intense pure liquid cacao flavors swirl with popping coconut aroma, all supported by semi-sweet porter made from loads of our dark chocolate and extra dark caramel malt.
Well, they nailed the description because that is some chocolatey beer.
It's aggressive on the chocolate.
Mm-hmm. Coconut is nice and subtle in the flavor, though, and just pulls it together.
It's not too nasty on the back end like some coconut beers I find. It seems to be fairly well balanced.
Yeah, it's not too much coconut, and it blends really well with the chocolate, especially in the flavor. You don't get a whole lot of coconut in the aroma, though. A little bit of it hiding behind the chocolate, but that...
Would you expect more coconut?
I would expect more coconut. I imagine this can isn't fresh off the canning line like a Rebellion would have been.
Let's see, what does this say? Oh, December.
Yeah, so what I've noticed, I've brewed coconut beers at home while home brewing, and the coconut aroma really fades really quickly, kind of like hops would as well. So it's another beer that you should drink fresh.
Fresh is best?
Fresh is best.
I like it. I can't stop sipping it. I just want to keep coming back to it. It's really nice.
Yeah, it's got a really nice mouthfeel, kind of velvety.
Doesn't bite you?
No, it's not astringent or aggressive for the roasted malts that are in there. The chocolate and coconut really kind of smooth everything out.
I dig it. Thumbs up?
Thumbs up for me. Any more?
I'm just going to baby this. I love it. I'm going to see what it tastes like when it warms up even a little bit more.
Oh yeah, that'll bring out a lot more of that chocolate and coconut.
I'm
savor this.
Planning a trip to Colorado. I think I'm going to have to make an Oscar Blues trip.
That's one of those destinations that everyone needs to see, apparently. I myself have not been there, but it's on the bucket list.
This is nice. I'm interested in trying something else they've got. I've heard all positive things so far.
Yeah, I've never heard a bad thing about Oscar Blues, and it's hard to find their product here in Saskatchewan. So it's kind of one of those things that when you're on the road traveling around and you see it, grab it, because there's a chance you might not see it again.
So let's talk about casks. Just from my general knowledge, I know that the ancient Greeks, they have records from Herodotus, and he's talking about casks filled with wine, filled with ales. And we know the Romans were brewing beer, and we know they were transporting the beer across the empire for their soldiers, for feeding to the civilians. They had merchants with records showing that they were transporting beer across the empire, including in Britain as far back as 190 AD. But what I want to know is what you know. Tap into your knowledge about what's going on with casks.
Well, my knowledge of casks is much more recent. The history that you know about the hundreds and hundreds of years ago, even thousands of years ago, is definitely more in depth than my knowledge. My knowledge is definitely more this century. But traditionally, casks were always just a wooden barrel. They didn't have the ability to force carbonate. They couldn't just go to Praxair and get a bottle of CO2 and force carbonate their beer. So the beer was put into a cask, and then it would re-ferment inside the cask, and that would add CO2 to the cask, which helped keep the beer a little bit more fresh over long traveling times.
When you talk about forcing, what do you mean by that?
Well, forced carbonation is when you put a beer into a keg and then hook up a CO2 line directly to that keg and then turn up the pressure on your CO2 bottle to whatever required PSI you need for that beer to carbonate. And that's what forced carbonation is when you just force the CO2 into the beer. And that is a relatively new thing in the whole world of beer. Kegs weren't invented until the 1960s, so really forced carbonation didn't even come into effect until that period of time in the 1960s. Up until then, it was always put into a cask or bottles, and then the bottle was primed with sugar. The yeast that's left in the beer consumes that sugar, creates CO2, and that's how you get a carbonated beer. But casks were always wooden barrels all the way up until about the 1950s, and then they started making steel barrels and aluminum barrels, and that would help keep the beer from getting oxidized because wood is air permeable, so even it's a better way of transporting beer and storing beer. But then you get to the metal casks, and then you can even hold a beer even longer, because once you carbonate it, then you can just keep it in that cask for a few months or even longer, just like you would in a can of beer kind of thing.
We see it with the Cask Festival. Casks pop up. It's never gone away. Why do you think people keep coming back to casks?
It's just the traditional way of drinking beer. That's how beer was drank all the way up until the 1960s with the invention of the keg. There's a movement in the UK right now called the Campaign for Real Ale, and they go by the acronym CAMRA, and they're really pushing towards beer being delivered and consumed the traditional way of being served through a cask. They want it to be carbonated in the cask with yeast and priming sugar like it had always been up until the 1960s. And they have about 190,000 members now, and they're apparently the largest single issue consumer group in the UK. They're campaigning towards promoting small breweries and the pub experience and pub businesses. They're also into reforming licensing laws, reducing tax on beer, and really stopping the continued consolidation amongst local British brewers. They want to keep everything local and small, and their real goal ultimately is to have beer served in casks and not kegs, because they feel kegged beer isn't real beer because it hasn't gone through that secondary fermentation in the cask.
Is there something flavor-wise or quality-wise that's
a cask beer, something that's been secondary fermented, gives a different mouthfeel, and usually in a cask beer it's not as highly carbonated, so it gives kind of a smoother mouthfeel, especially if it's a dark beer that's served through a cask. And even with IPAs and lighter beers that are served through a cask, it just has like more of a creamy mouthfeel, and that's due to the yeast that have done their re-fermentation inside the cask.
Okay.
Because the yeast produce other flavor compounds other than just CO2 and alcohol. They produce other flavor compounds that you just can't get force carbonating a keg.
So it's kind of a unique experience compared to just having a keg.
Oh, very much so, yes.
So it's maybe another reason to come out on the Friday for the Cask Fest.
That's a huge reason to come out for the Cask Festival, because these beers are beers that you can't experience every day going to your local restaurant or pub, because they don't have casks available every single day. It's a special one-off kind of thing around here. That's what the campaign for Real Ale is trying to change in the UK. They would like all beer served from a cask. No kegs, and good luck to them.
We're also seeing 13 different beers coming. That means 13 unique beers, and I think the instruction from Mark and from Jen was just do your best. We had no, it has to be porter, it has to be IPA. We just said bring whatever wild, wacky, creative beer you want to bring. In terms of cask ales, you've mentioned to me in the past that you've brewed some. What would you say was your favorite?
The favorite beer that we brewed for a cask was definitely our English mild, our Earl Grey English mild. And we had brewed that for the Ales Club to serve at Beer, Bacon and Bands. And it went over really well at Beer, Bacon and Bands. So then we were invited by Rebellion to brew a cask for the Cask Festival, and we decided, well, this one went over really well, so let's tweak the recipe a little bit and try it again here. And then we brewed it for the Cask Festival and killed it last year. Apparently everybody loved it. It was gone in no time. I myself had a couple of pints, so I might have been helping along with that, draining the cask.
I remember drinking that one. I think I voted for it.
Yeah, I also voted for it. Maybe that's why it won.
It deserved to win, I think. It was my favorite of all the ones I tried.
We got rave reviews about it, and I love that beer. And both times we served it through a cask. I believe we served it through a cask when we did it at Beer, Bacon and Bands as well.
One of the things I do like about casks, I think there's a little theater involved, especially when it comes to tapping it.
Oh, yes.
We see with First Frickin' Friday at Bushwakker, they march the cask around and they shake it up a bit. And they get the big mallet.
Yep.
I love that. I love the theater of that.
It's an event. It makes drinking that pint an entire event.
We're going to be live casting our tapping.
Oh, excellent.
We're going to have...
Any explosions going to happen?
We hope, maybe. Last year we had it spray up on the walls and the ceiling, so we were kind of scraping it off, but...
That makes it exciting.
It worked out. We didn't lose too much beer. What would be some of the reasons that people would move on from casks? Why would they move away from them towards kegs?
Casks really just don't last as long, especially once you tap the cask, because they're not served under forced CO2, so they're not. As soon as you tap the cask and start pouring it, there's a peg in the top of the cask that allows air in, and casks are typically served through gravity feed. So you open up the tap at the bottom, air comes in through the top, and air oxidizes the beer. So you're losing CO2, you're losing carbonation, and you're also oxidizing the beer at that point in time. So once you tap a cask, you should really have that thing drained in one night. Once you save it for the next day, especially if you drink half the cask and then leave it overnight, well, there's that much air and headspace inside the cask, it just kind of makes the beer go stale. Whereas kegging, it's always under forced CO2, so as soon as you tap that keg, it won't get oxidized, it's not going to go bad right away. You can serve that for a month or two. Hopefully the keg is gone sooner than that, but should it last that long?
Fresh is best.
Fresh is best, yes.
Okay. Is there anything you think we've missed?
Well, my favorite cask of all time, I guess. The favorite cask that I've been a part of brewing was that Earl Grey English Mild. But my favorite cask that I've ever had was actually a Rebellion cask, and it was a chai stout. And I believe Vanessa put this one together a couple years ago, it would have been, and I still remember that beer. I remember it just being fantastic. I'm not a tea drinker. I couldn't tell you what flavors are supposed to come out of a chai tea, but when I had that stout, it was just fantastic. It was wonderful. And
I remember it.
I've been waiting for it to come back, and what's the ETA on this, Matt? I'll have to talk to Vanessa about that.
We'll have to ask Vanessa when she gets back. Chai stout. I remember that, yeah.
It's fantastic.
I kind of forgot about that one, but now that I think about it, I remember, oh yeah, it was pretty good.
Yeah, let's take it off the back burner and get her going again.
I want to thank you for joining us, Parker. I invite our audience to join us next time when we'll be talking with Stefan Rosinski. He's a young Canadian race car driver with the need for speed, and you can see his Porsche GT3 tearing up the track with the Rebellion logo on the front of it. We've teamed up with him this race season, and we're pretty excited. If you want to find out the latest news about Rebellion Brewing, be sure to check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Untapped. Thanks for joining the Rebellion.
Oh, come on, man, pick up your piece.